Mumbai studios of Republic TV, it's time for Arnab Goswami on the debate.
Arnab Goswami on the debate at 10, powered by Kar Dekho and Royal Ranthambore.
The Russian troops are backing off from the Ukraine border, and that's a fact. The Russian government says the claims and the hysteria over the possible invasion was always exaggerated. But funnily enough, the US and NATO are just not ready to buy Russia's claims of a pullback. Which makes me think, is it possible that Vladimir Putin fooled the entire world with his threats, that his pullback, that he's kept them all confused, that it was psychological war at another level? Well, here are the latest confusing developments and then our global debate.
Russian troops have pulled back from the Crimean Peninsula after its military drills. There's been a significant climb down of Russian troops from Ukraine's border. Putin and his allies seem to have the last laugh over West's Ukraine invasion hysteria.
В том, что касается вашего наблюдения за продолжающейся истерией, конечно, нас это сильно, ну, я бы не сказал забавляет, но вызывает недоумение, глубокое недоумение.
For the last 72 hours, Washington has been whipping up a war frenzy, speculating Russian invasion. The US rhetoric continues.
If Russia does invade in the days and weeks ahead, the human cost for Ukraine will be immense. And the strategic cost for Russia will also be immense. If Russia attacks Ukraine, it will be met with overwhelming international condemnation.
And unlike what the West wants the world to believe, the streets of Ukraine are calm on its Unity Day.
As you see behind me here, there are people on the streets, cars. Nobody's really afraid of anything happening here.
But West has doubts over Russia's intent. NATO defense ministers are meeting over the alleged invasion threat.
We have heard the signs from Moscow about readiness to continue diplomatic efforts. But so far, we have not seen any de-escalation on the ground. On the contrary, it appears that Russia continues the military build-up.
Did a few military drills on the Russian side throw global superpowers off cure? Has Putin ensured an egg on the face of the West? And after the Afghanistan fiasco, has Biden once again been left embarrassed with his invasion narrative crumbling? Let's debate.
And I must begin by saying that the situation is extremely confusing. There were people on all sides who were smacking their lips at the prospect of an invasion. And today, if I am not mistaken, was supposed to be the day when Russia should be invading. And we should have therefore been at the beginning of a world war. Now, nothing like that has happened. And a lot of people don't know what to make of it. Some people are saying, has Putin fooled the West? And yesterday there was a panelist, and I want to begin with Brahma Chelani, but I want to also welcome others. We have Mr. Melink. He's a co-director of Foreign Relations and the International Security Program, live from Kiev. There he is in the check shirt, ladies and gentlemen. We have Rich Outson. He's a retired colonel of the U.S. Army, former senior advisor at the State Department and senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation. He's joining us from Virginia. We have Dr. Vladimir Kulikov. Dr. Vladimir Kulikov is part of the joint research project at Moscow State University, Vienna Institute of Economic and Social Studies. He's live from Moscow. We have Mr. Sergei Strokin, and there he is. He's a journalist and columnist for the Kommersant Publishing House, live from Moscow tonight. And we have Victor Gao once again. He's a very well-spoken chair professor at Soochow University, watching smugly from Beijing as the world moves towards and away from a world war every few minutes. It's a very confusing situation. What do you make of it? Brahma Chelani, to begin with, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Center for Policy Research. What's going on, Dr. Chelani?
This crisis was never about Ukraine. This crisis is about American post-Cold War policy of NATO creep to Russia's borders. And this crisis is going to be a long, drawn-out affair. I never believed that the Russians would invade Ukraine. It didn't make sense for them to invade Ukraine. But the crisis has been good news for the US, for Russia, and even for China. Let's begin with the US.
Okay.
By unleashing the dogs of war, Biden has been able to divert attention from his problems at home. His approval rating is at a very low. And for Russia, this has been a financial windfall. The oil prices today are at a 7-year high. So for Russia, this is a real financial bonanza. And for China, the fact that the Americans and the Russians are at each other's throats opens more space for China to pursue its expansionism. In fact, when President Putin was in Beijing earlier this month, the Chinese extracted a promise from Putin that he would increase Russian gas exports to China by almost tenfold.
Okay.
That will help China to build a safety net in case the West imposes energy sanctions or an energy blockade on China in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So a increased supply of gas from Russia will insulate China from such a Western
Dr. Chelani, as usual, you have begun the debate with unique perspectives and a fair amount of provocation. And I want to get our Chinese panelists here to respond. Victor Gao, I think that sounds extremely logical. Even more than America or Russia, the beneficiaries of this seem to be the Chinese. I'd like your take on it. You heard Brahma Chelani.
Thank you very much for having me. China has very good strategic relations with Russia. China and Russia call the relations not as allies, but better and stronger than allies. On the other hand, China also has very good relations with Ukraine. China-Ukraine economic exchanges are mutually beneficial to China as well as to Ukraine. China wants to see peace between Russia and Ukraine. China is opposed to any war between Russia and Ukraine. China and the Russian leaders declared during the Beijing Winter Olympic that both China and Russia oppose the continued eastern expansion of NATO. I believe this is the crux of the matter. Russia is firmly opposed to Ukraine becoming a NATO member, to the extent they are saying to the whole world, over my dead body. I think the United States and NATO need to be sensitive to this very fundamental concern and sensitivity on the behalf of Russia. And we are firmly opposed to Ukraine becoming a NATO member, because we believe if Ukraine really wants to become a NATO member, it will trigger a war between Russia and Ukraine, and between Russia and NATO, and possibly between Russia and the United States. This will be Armageddon in the world. Let's have peace rather than war.
That would benefit you. I mean, if we are all looking at it from the point of view of pure geostrategy. And I saw Brian Bonner joining us right now. He's former executive director and chief editor of the Kiev Post, which is Ukraine's oldest English language newspaper. I think he was disagreeing with your perspective. And I frankly, Victor, and please don't take it as an Indian being cynical of the Chinese always, I believe that it's been part of your plan to use Russia as a flank for your global ambitions. You know, and to an
extent, China is peace rather than war. This is the fundamental philosophical point.
Philosophical point is the essential, not the practical. It's the philosophy, not the practice. My disagreement with you, Victor. But I want Brian to tell us why he was nodding his head furiously as you were speaking. Brian Bonner, would you like to respond to what Victor Gao said from Beijing?
Yeah, well, that's nonsense, because if China was against war, why didn't it stand up in the United Nations and stand up to Russia and tell Russia to get out of Ukraine's territory, which it invaded 8 years ago, and illegally occupies Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine, equaling 7% of Ukraine's territory. Ukraine is a fledgling democracy. The problem is not NATO expansion, never has been NATO expansion. Ukraine has not even close to qualifying for NATO membership. The problem is Vladimir Putin's aggression since he took power, especially in the last 8 years, and his view that Ukraine is not a sovereign country, that it should be part of Russia. And if Ukraine doesn't obey, he's going to, like in the Stone Age, bomb it to oblivion and take over. So that is nonsense. If China is Ukraine's friend, it should stand up for Ukraine, its territorial integrity. Now, China has a bigger role to play here for peace and democracy if it chose, but it doesn't choose that way because China has influence as the leading trade partner to many nations, including Ukraine, including Russia, but it chooses not to do this. And so this is ridiculous. This is not the reason for NATO's expansion, and NATO is a defensive alliance, is Russian aggression. It's a response to Russian aggression. Pure and simple.
But 1 minute, Brian. Let's go back, take 2 steps back. You know, Brahma, as usual, took this in the direction of China. We all got swayed. But let's pull back for a minute. Now tell me, Colonel Outzen, what happened? We were all waiting. Your president said that today was D-Day. You know, cameras were up in the air to catch pictures of the Russian missiles just firing away at Kiev. You know, the entire media was there. It was a question of time. What happened? Where is the invasion?
Yeah. Well, the invasion is ongoing in the Crimea and the Donbass already. So the question about whether there will be a Russian invasion of the Ukraine is a little bit of a red herring in that sense. I really want to try to clarify what's going on through 3 main points. The first is that as a military man, we never try to figure out first the intentions of an aggressor. We try to figure out the capabilities, because the intentions they will try to deceive as to. In the Russian praxis, this is referred to as maskirovka, masking your intentions, and the Russians are past and present masters of it. But if we look at capabilities, there are 150,000 Russian troops in and around the Ukraine. There is naval capabilities, amphibious capabilities that have been brought from very, very far away that could go for Odessa, potentially, or for other parts of the Black Sea North Coast. And there is the ongoing occupation both of Crimea and of the Donbass. So it's not far-fetched to say that there is and could be an expansion of the Russian occupation of the Ukraine. This is nobody sort of wagging the dog to make up a story for political. This is a real empirical fact that the Russians are in Ukraine and around Ukraine and have massively increased their capabilities.
But Colonel Outzen, may I intervene for a minute if you don't mind? My point to you is, Colonel Outzen, and anyone can correct me, my feeling is that you have underestimated Putin. He has killed 2 or 3 birds with one stone, in my view. He has managed to recognize 2 regions. And as you may have observed, you mentioned about the Donbass. Hasn't Russia completely outwitted the entire West when in the middle of all this warmongering rhetoric about a weapons buildup, a cyber war, Russia silently passed a bill. and Dr. Vladimir Kulikov can confirm this, silently passed a bill to recognize 2 regions in the Donbass region and violated the Minsk agreements. So he's already achieved. And to be very honest, I feel that he used the Western media. I would say he even used Joe Biden. And Joe Biden was the one who went around and said that, things are going to go crazy, etc. So Joe Biden was part of his own plan, if it were.
I agree, actually. And I think that it's wrong to think of what's going on as a binary peace or war. What we see going on is coercion. It is coercive diplomacy or military coercion. You can call it either way.
No.
But there's always 4 steps involved.
No. One second. Colonel, again, a point of disagreement. Actually, I'm speaking too much. I'll take it to Sergey and then to Dr. Vladimir Kulikov. You see, we saw statements, official statements, Dr. Kulikov, from the US Press Secretary, John Kirby, who said there's going to be a fake attack. And as part of this fake attack, Russia will produce some very graphic propaganda video, including videos of dead bodies and corpses. This was the hype that was created not by the Western media alone, but by the American government itself. What is your take on that? The kind of hype that was built up about an invasion today. Dr. Kulikov, please.
Oh, thank you very much. To be frank, I think that Russia is a very pragmatic country, and it has a very good understanding of the interconnectedness of different issues in relations with different countries. And it's okay. The Kremlin has tested the military troops and the rapid deployment both in Ukraine and in Kazakhstan. So yes. I think this effect of the ability to rapidly deploy military forces from one border to another, that was the Russian win. And I have never overestimated, working for many years, both with Russian military and political figures, I have never overestimated the influence of the hardliners. Russia is very pragmatic, it has achieved its goal, and in my humble opinion, very many Europeans, I don't know what general notion of the West means. I understand Orient and Occident. So the West is a kind of a propaganda invention. So very many people all around Russia has understood that it's a good and a very pragmatic partner, while the United States have launched an unprecedentedly tense propaganda campaign. Okay, it's not for the consumption of the pragmatists.
Well, I think I would like to go across straight to Kiev to get a response to what you're saying. I have no doubt you're all very experienced people. You've dealt with establishments in your countries. And pardon me if I'm giving a layman perspective to this. What we are concerned about is there was genuine hype. I know that Russia has achieved its objective. And what you're saying is that we have proven to the whole world our capability. And we have shown to Europe that you need to deal with us. And I think to a great extent what you're trying to say, Dr. Kulikov, and you say it better than me, what you're trying to say is that this is no longer the USSR which you thought had broken up and which was a thing of the past. And may I say this, Dr. Kulikov, that in 2014 or 15, when I traveled to Moscow and there was a big conference, a media conference, we went around, met people from the Russian establishment, I could see that gradual sense of assertion that was coming out within Russia, and you're saying it's a reflection of that. But let me ask Oleksiy Melink, who is co-director of Foreign Relations and International Security Programs at Kiev. Do you buy that? Has Russia given you that message in a way? Do you believe the message in Kiev today is we are going to have to shake hands with the Russians at some point rather than fight them?
About Russian objectives. It's very strange to hear from our Russian participants about
Russia achieving its objectives. What has Russia actually achieved by launching the war 8 years ago against Ukraine? We had 80% of people in Ukraine who perceived Russia as a friendly country back in 2013. Now it's only 8%. So what have you achieved? Instead of having friendly country, Slavic country at your border, now you have an enemy, because you are our enemy. Secondly, one of the Russian national security objective was to prevent NATO extension. And Mr. Putin has done everything possible to invade NATO, to reinvent NATO, to give NATO a new mission. So we should be very careful talking about Russian objective, national objective, or national interest, and Mr. Putin regime's objective. About our Chinese colleague,
yes,
you say that Russia will attack Ukraine if Ukraine joins NATO. Let me remind you that back in 2014, Ukraine has a non-bloc status in its constitution, exactly at the time when Russia attacked Ukraine. And also let me tell you that China is so eager to have peace that most of the cases China supports Russian position. And also about Chinese interest. Perhaps, yeah, there is short-term interest in this global struggle between the global powers. But if there is a big war in center of Europe, believe me, at least you will lose one of your trade partners, which is Ukraine, supposedly to be destroyed by Russia. And now, by the way, without even military operation, Ukraine is suffering huge economic losses because of the maritime blockade, because of the airspace blockade, and because of this intensive military budget that Ukraine has to spend for defense during the last 8 years.
We have had a very strong response from Oleksiy Melink on this debate. I want to tell you that viewers across the world are watching this live on streaming and responding to the sharp comments on either side. Now, Sergei has not spoken, and Sergei Strokin is a journalist and columnist. He's joining us from Moscow. I would like you to come in, Sergei, to that. 2 points made there, in summary. Mr. Melink says to the Russians, specifically to Dr. Kulikov, what did you gain? You lost the support of the people in Ukraine. And then he says to the Chinese, do you think you're going to gain in the long term? It's a short term, almost Pyrrhic victory for you, if it were to be one. Your response, please, from Moscow, Sergei. It's a very tense debate, viewers, in a way,
Absolutely.
But everyone's putting their point really well. Sergei Strokin, yes.
Yeah. So since I step into the debate with some delay, let me start by saying that I suggest all the participants to be very careful about the wording. So if we use words like aggression or invasion or war, I'm not saying this is taboo words, but before using these words, we have to spell it out. What do we mean by that, and how what difference we make from, say, aggression or invasion or some other action? What is the basic difference between President Putin and President Biden? Well, if President Putin says something,
dictator, the other is a democratically elected leader.
However, this is not the case with President Biden. You are well aware that a couple of weeks ago, President Biden said to his Western allies that the new war in the center of Europe will start on February 16. Yeah. And all of a sudden, President Biden backtracked from that. A couple of days back, when reporters in White House asked him whether war will take place or not, he said, "Oh, my congratulations on the day of all lovers." So such thing would never happen to President Putin. So I'm saying this for the simple reason that I totally believe that this idea of this big war in Ukraine, which would start on February 16, this is not Russian story, this is not Ukrainian story, this is not even European story, but this is the American domestic story. It was invented by President Biden. We can argue what were the arguments for that. He started that, and he made that us to live these 2 weeks of madness. And then all of a sudden we hear that the concept has already changed. Now they're saying that the war can start any moment. Look, it's an open secret that Russia has military might which could enable her to occupy Ukraine just in weeks. But ask yourself a simple question. Why this was not done in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and
Brian is responding. 1 second. 1 second. Sergey Strokin, I want to interrupt you for a minute because I saw two.
But answer my question. Why we are talking about this now?
They want to answer your question. 1 second. Brian, Sergey, can you wait a minute? I saw two gentlemen there get very, upset with what you're saying, and I think that was Colonel Outson from Virginia and Brian Bonner from Kiev.
Wait, give me 30 seconds, okay?
Okay, I give you 30 seconds, then you give them a chance to respond after that, please. Yes, Mr. Strokin, complete your point. Yeah.
You are talking a lot about Russia's military build-up, but please ask, Mr. Anchorman, please ask your editors to ask how many Ukrainian troops were moved to the border with self-proclaimed republics. Ask them and show it. So if we are balancing it, we have to see that the two sides were involved in these smiles with clenched teeth.
Okay, I take that. I just want to tell you, while we are doing this debate, we have just got a statement from NATO. And the statement from NATO essentially says it's very concerned about the unprovoked and unjustified Russian military buildup in and around Ukraine and Belarus, and urging Russia to choose the path of diplomacy, reverse the buildup, withdraw forces, etc., and be open to dialogue. This statement has just come in, right? Now, who wanted to respond first? First, it was Colonel. Okay, so Colonel Rich Outson first. You want to respond to Sergey?
Yes, I do. So as to this issue of a U.S. narrative or a Biden story about this, let's keep in mind that while the hard power for a real war is still in place, there is an intense psychological war that's already being conducted. And my hat is off to Vladimir Putin and to my friends in Moscow. You are masters at psychological warfare. You have kept all of the leaders of the West dangling on strings for months by saying, war, maybe not. So the psychological counterpost to that was to take the certainty or the uncertainty out by saying, on a date certain, it will happen. Yes, this is psychological warfare by the West, drawing on intelligence to wrong-foot the Russians in the way that they have tried to wrong-foot the West for months and months. So yes, we will say the Russians are going to attack. Now it's on you to either attack or not attack. But we're not going to be dangled on a string by this uncertainty about whether you will or won't.
So I put it in simple language. What Colonel Outson says, and Vladimir, I'd like Dr. Kulikov to respond to that, and then I'll get you in, Brian. What he's saying to you is, the Russians thought they were very smart. They had all the cards. They could decide when to push, when to pull back, etc. And here the West, together, unitedly, has told the Russians, come. You're expected to attack. So when you don't, you're the ones who will look like you're the ones capitulating. Do you buy that, Dr. Kulikov? You want to respond to our friend from Virginia?
I try to. I mean, I'm not the official Kremlin spokesman, and I have my personal, let's say, contradictions with the way propaganda is working, and I never follow it. I never followed it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. I see figures and I see numbers. And if you turn the TV off and try to be a kind of a critical thinker, I see no big game around it. And I see another process which is leading the Russian government, at least I see it that way. It's first, again, I will maintain it's a growing pragmatism and a very quick adaptation to the realities of both Russia's role as a global actor and a regional actor, a very responsible one. In my personal view, this Kazakhstan story has shown that Russia is not going to dominate even the so-called post-Soviet space, but rather adapt very quickly, very mildly, and in the best way possible. I'm not the Kremlin spokesman. This is how I see it. And I think somehow the idea to freeze the so-called Ukrainian conflict, to put it maybe to the next generation, is a very good idea.
One minute. Dr. Kulikov, that was the point that Colonel Outzen was making was slightly different. I take it to Brian Bonner. He was making a very simple point. He said that Russia, for whatever reasons, strategic reasons otherwise, is pushing and threatening a conflict. And Brian, now it's up to the Russians to actually act upon their threat. Because as we all know, if you issue a threat, you're expected to carry it out. So what will Russia do now? That's
another reality.
It's a reality. So what will Russia do now? NATO is contemplating adding long-term troops, right? EU is still threatening Russia with sanctions, Brian, right? Norway is sending more troops to Lithuania. NATO defense ministers are holding hurried meetings. So I can also look at it this way, that till day before yesterday, it was Putin who was deciding what to do next. Now it is America and NATO which is deciding what to do next while Russia is pulling back. How does that look?
And we're very grateful to the Russians, to our Russian friends for unifying NATO. Thank you.
He says that he's grateful to the Russians for unifying NATO. How do you react to that? NATO, which in my view, Vladimir, Dr. Kulikov, NATO after Afghanistan was really looking dismembered. We used to do TV programs calling NATO a divided, failed force. NATO's got this breath of oxygen after all this, hasn't it?
It's okay. Why not? Let it breathe. I mean, it's a moment.
Okay.
Let's see what happens next.
Interesting.
I'm not saying that Russians will be happy with NATO expansion, but if this organization has some capacity to serve, to continue, okay, let it be.
Okay, I want Brahma back on this. See, Brahma started the discussion and look where it's gone, Brahma. How do you take it, Brahma? This is something bigger. I don't think it's over. I sort of agree with you, Dr. Chelani, that this is not over. For me, I think this is the first chapter. What do you think, Brahma?
There's a certain irony to the discussion that we're having right now. And we had a panelist, Victor from China, saying that China is a peace-loving country.
Yeah.
The irony is that the world's biggest military buildup today is not the Russian buildup against Ukraine. It's China's military buildup against India.
That's true.
And China's ongoing border aggression against India for the last 22 months.
True.
The Ukraine crisis and the threats of China against Taiwan have obscured China's aggression against India. So it's so ironical that we're discussing the crisis between Russia and the United States over Ukraine and over NATO, when the fact is that the biggest military buildup today in the world is the Chinese buildup against India. Having said that, we have to look at what is a possible way out from the current crisis. And I think a solution is possible if the Americans and the Russians are looking for a solution. Of course, if they want to have this crisis stretch on for political or geopolitical reasons, of course, that could be a reason why not to, for a reason for not to seek a compromise. But a compromise is possible, especially if both sides are willing to look for a solution. And the solution has to be about Ukraine's readiness to be a neutral country, a neutral Ukraine would be able to
How can that happen?
safeguard its territorial integrity and also be able to safeguard against the Chinese.
I'll take that to our friends in Ukraine. Is that easier said than done, Brian? Brahma Chelani says, yeah, you heard him.
Ukraine was a neutral country, and look what happened to it. Russia invaded. It's not equivalency here. Russia's military might is so much greater than Ukraine. Ukrainian troops are trying to defend their territory, which Russia invaded in 2014. Now, Russia, why not earlier? Russia tried to take over bigger parts of Ukraine in 2014, all in retaliation for a popular revolution that overturned the Kremlin-backed autocrat that Vladimir Putin favored. It failed. Now Russia's back at it and has periodically tried to get back at it in many ways, from cyber attacks to attacking the economy to buying off politicians to many other things. But this, at heart here, is democracy.
All right. Dr. Vladimir Kulikov responding to you, please, from Moscow. Go on, please. Yes. Dr. Kulikov responding sharply to Brian.
That's not a discussion about buying politicians and all that stuff, saying words like aggression and all that. That's not interesting. You should join the TV show, and we have lots nowadays, and they kind of misuse words for their own personal popularity. I don't see any Russian invasion in 2014 and 2015.
Donbass, Crimea. Donbass, Crimea, 14,000 people killed. That's what it is.
Also, Dr. Mellink is coming back to the debate. Yes, go on. Dr. Mellink also coming back.
Okay.
I'm very grateful for having such a good speaker from Russia, because this is all about the Russian logic. I would suggest our respectful or not respectful speaker from Russia to refresh your memory about the international definition of aggression. It's 1974 UN Security Council resolution, if I'm not wrong. And you will see that out of 10 probably points, at least 8 were completed. This is illegal annexation of Crimea. And what is Russia doing now? I mean, the maritime blockade of the Black Sea and Azov Sea, is it not an aggression? And then, if it's not an aggression, that I don't know what the real aggression is.
Can I add that Vladimir Putin is a liar? In 1994, there was the Budapest Memorandum, and again, Russia agreed to respect Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. It completely violated that. The issue again is democracy. There's no democracy in Russia. We know that. There's no freedom of speech. There's human rights violation, and there's an imperial aggression. That's a fact, and Ukraine has to live with it and has been living with it for centuries. And that's the truth.
Sergey.
That's absolutely funny.
May I say one thing? As I'm listening to this discussion, I think there's another angle to this, gentlemen. And Victor, taking off from what Brahma said before I conclude, there is a feeling that Ukraine, this particular conflict, is essentially part of a global build-up between what will be two blocks. On the one side, there will be, America, Quad, countries aligned more towards America, and then there'll be the Russia-China bloc. And therefore, this is going to be long and prolonged. Are you anticipating that as well?
I hope not. I think the best solution out of this quagmire is for Ukraine to become a permanent neutral country, like Switzerland or Austria or Sweden, because this will really...
How do you become neutral with 150,000 troops on your border? What kind of neutrality would that be? Would Switzerland be neutral if it was to be, if the threat to Switzerland to be invaded would exist on a minute-by-minute basis? Unless you're willing to give up your sovereignty.
First of all, I truly believe there will be no more pressure from Russia if Ukraine becomes a permanent neutral state. And this will enable Ukraine to devote itself
I think by that logic, Taiwan is a neutral country. Do you recognize that neutrality?
Well, neutrality has helped countries like Switzerland, Sweden, and Austria for decades, if not for centuries.
Okay, we'll have to have another. We'll have to have another.
NATO will be suicidal.
Okay.
And it will be explosive for many other.
Okay, one last word. Dr. Melink wants to make a point.
The question raised by the other panelists about China, India. I would say India will be better served if it devotes to development. 40 years ago, China economy and Indian economy were more or less alike.
The difference is, Mr. Gao, I'll tell you one thing. And I'll say this on the global panel, whether you like it or not. You see, the Indian economy is going to outstrip you in 15 years. Maybe earlier in terms of purchasing power parity. Second, I'll give you another bit of good news. I'll tell you another bit of good news. Our economy is the fastest growing in the world, double the speed of the falling Chinese economy. Okay? And I think if you learned the number of, lastly, Mr. Gao, with a lot of respect to you, with a lot of respect, you know how many soldiers in China, Chinese soldiers died and were carried back in body bags in Galwan. We gave you such a bloody nose in Galwan. The Chinese don't have a fighting army. They have a theoretical army. They don't have a fighting army, which is why even now you're shooting off the shoulder of the Russian army. The Russian army is a fighting army. The Chinese army has never won a war. So it's easier to shoot off the Russians' shoulder.
With due respect, you forgot the Korean War. And with due respect, and I do not want
with due respect, I was born way after the 50s.
And China did not win the Korean War.
For sure.
Okay.
They are up to when they ease the
I won't go into what happened in the Korean War. Anyway, this is getting to be a very interesting debate. Mr. Melink wants to say something, raised his hand for a long time, so last word to him.
Yeah, very brief. I would suggest that the harder Russians press for Ukraine's neutrality, the sooner they will get Finland and Sweden to get rid of their neutrality and join NATO.
That's a good comeback. This debate can continue. It's just that I have another one lined up after this. But gentlemen, we disagreed a lot, but this is a fantastic debate. I'm glad that you all came, and I will continue this forward. It's a privilege talking to all of you. Thank you so much.